RJ Bond, how are you today?
Hey, good to meet you.
Fantastic to have you. So excited. You know, I always say, if you love music, the next best thing is to go behind the music.
Right.
And find out the stories about the songs and the lives and the, you know, the individual of these characters. And as we look over these inductions of Tupac and NWA from the Indie Summit, you know, brings us to talk to you about your documentaries. I know you come from working behind the scenes in movies over the years, but tell us a little bit about what fascinated you about Tupac Shakur that led you to make the first documentary, and tell us about that one.
Well, I think when I got into this, originally I got asked to get involved with doing documentaries and doing a documentary about Tupac. What kept me in the game about Tupac and what really struck me about him was the impact that he made on people's lives. I didn't know him until posthumously. I didn't know him when he was alive, and but I learned about him through Frank Alexander, who was his bodyguard during that time. And I saw how his death affected Frank, how it affected people like Tracy Robinson, Layla Steinberg, people that were involved with Tupac through his life. Now, I mean, when you die, you're grieved by your family, you're grieved by people that are close to you, but do strangers grieve for you? It reminds me of Jim Morrison and how so many people,
Jimi Hendrix, all these guys.
They go to France and they put flowers on Jim Morrison's grave. You know, he made an impact on these people's lives. Complete strangers. And so I saw that phenomenon with Tupac, and I wanted to know more about why that was. And that's really what kept me in it. But then more intriguing to me was the fact that for as big as this guy was, and for as big of an impact he had culturally on what was going on at the time, that the investigation into his death seemed to be very lackluster. Just didn't seem to have a lot of momentum behind it, not a lot of substance behind it. And that, of course, asked the question, why? Why? And so that's kind of what led me into the whole space, and I've kind of just hung out there since.
Yeah. Now, how did you meet Frank Alexander, and what do you think it was about you that he entrusted to be able to tell his story?
Well, Frank and I met, we were introduced by a personal friend, a mutual friend that was actually, Frank was training him, and the guy that was training him was actually a good friend of mine, dear friend of mine. And we met at the Orange County Fair. I think, and it's kind of permeated throughout the rest of our relationship. Frank and I were friends for best of friends, almost 20 years. Frank became the godfather of one of my sons. I think what Frank, if I could think what Frank saw in me was that there was a transparency there, that we didn't have a lot of secrets from each other. We were kind of in each other's hair all the time. And Frank told me a lot of things. There were times when, especially towards the end of his life, that there were more secrets, there were more barriers between the two of us. And that's hard when you've been friends for that long to think there, but I'm sure there were reasons for some of that. But Frank, I think originally, especially that, Frank and I just had a completely different, almost opposite personalities. Frank was very much, he was very image conscious, he was very faithful guy, very religious, really held to his religious beliefs. I was, you know, former Navy. I was a guy that was more pragmatic, I think, about stuff. Frank was always trying to think maybe he could get the next big hit, or maybe somebody might do his story or something like that. I was very much more, listen, if it makes a couple of bucks, let's do it. Kind of a journeyman type of attitude.
Right. So the two of you kind of completed the whole and became the yin and the yang of the operation.
Yeah, it really was.
That's great.
Yeah,
now, when you started telling the story of Tupac Assassination, the first documentary, what was the things that really surprised you like the most, that were just mind-blowing?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing for me was that I had grown up with a family of cops. My father was a cop, my grandfather was a cop. There's a mindset about police officers and how they go about investigating things, and there's a conclusion to it, there's a process to it. I think that with the Pac investigation, I think the thing that jumped out at me is how many witnesses were not interviewed. In fact, I'll take a step back. Originally, we weren't going to do anything about the murder investigation. We were going to do a project that was called Tupac Revelation. And what it was about was how the music industry, especially the hip-hop industry, had changed after the deaths of Tupac and Biggie. Because I really felt like there was a seismic shift in the whole gangster rap and the whole, that kind of closed the door on that.
Yeah, a new chapter began.
Yeah, it really did. And so we wanted to see about how that germinated throughout the rest of the music industry. 20 years had gone by, 10 years had gone by, I think at that point it was 10 years. But how much the music industry had changed. And so we started talking to people that were inside the music industry, talking about that. Frank knew a lot of bodyguards that are bodyguard celebrities and bodyguard singers, and we talked to them. But I started to find out that these people were all part of the story of the last days of Tupac Shakur in one way or another. And they all had one thing in common, and that the police hadn't talked to any of them. And I said to Frank, here's your story. Here's the real story, is why not? What kind of an investigation do you do where critical people that were involved in the last days of his life, the day he died, the day he was shot, all of these things were critical, important to his story, to close his story especially, and yet the police weren't doing anything about it. I thought that was really weird. And so that's really what gave us the thrust to make the Assassination movie. So I think the thing that struck out to me the most was clearly who hadn't been talked to at that point.
Wow. So understanding law enforcement, there's, I guess, priority cases, and for some reason it shockingly wasn't a priority investigation. Obviously, if there's people that hadn't been talked to, been a cold case for so long, I mean,
Well, you got to consider the times. There a couple of things. The O.J. trial had just come and gone. That was still recent memory, and what a circus that was. You had the Rodney King beating, and what a circus that was. And it was very inflammatory. The whole issue, racial politics, are very inflammatory. And I think that when Pac was shot, and I'm not the only one that shares this opinion, many people believe this, that when Tupac was shot in the middle of Vegas, during those days, Vegas was trying to build the MGM theme park up. It actually had an amusement park behind the casino. Go give your kids something to do.
Yeah, Ferris wheel and all that.
Yeah, give away the mortgage and give your kids something to do. They can float down the lazy river while you're gambling the mortgage away.
Yeah.
But they were trying to build this whole family-friendly place to come for the kids and all that. And I think that the media circus surrounding a hip-hop artist and the gangs and all the baggage that it brought with it was something Vegas just did not want to have a part of. And I think that the instructions came down. It wasn't like Oscar Goodman wasn't familiar with controversy. Oscar Goodman was the mayor of Las Vegas. He was involved with the mob. He was a mob lawyer. It wasn't like they didn't understand controversy. They certainly did. And I think that gave them a unique insight because of the mob and all that as to what kind of a circus this might be. Throw the race card in there, and now it's explosive. And they thought, this is just not the place, the image that we want for Vegas, and I think they canned it for that reason. I really do. The other predominant thought about it, though, having said that, in my experience over the last 20 years, looking at this in the last 10 years, I do wonder whether or not the inability for witnesses to cooperate with the investigation, whether it be people that were close, eyewitnesses to the situation, people that were character witnesses later. These people change their stories constantly. And there's various reasons why they do. Sometimes it's memory, sometimes it's influence, it just depends. And I think that the Vegas police have a good idea of who they want for this, who they think it is. And because they can't get the witnesses, and of course a lot of them have died, you can't confront witnesses, which is your right under the Constitution. If you're being tried for something, is the right to confront witnesses, and if they're dead, how can you confront them? So I think Vegas knows who they like for this situation, and I think it's not what the popular opinion is about who they think it is, And I think the reason that they're keeping it quiet is because at some point they're going to close this case. Now, an investigation can be closed by an arrest and a conviction, but it can also be closed with what they call closed other. And what that means is that we got the guy, this is the guy we believe, we've come to a logical conclusion to this case, saying that Professor Plum did it with the candlestick in the library. And we know that, but because Professor Plum can't confront any witnesses, we're going to close the case, say we closed it, we figured it out, it came to its logical conclusion, factual, logical conclusion, but we can't prosecute the case because there are no witnesses left. Okay? So what happens there is you can close it other. Vegas police has not closed this case other. Which tells me that if they had the guy in Orlando Anderson or somebody who's the dead guy, and they blame the dead guy and he's the one responsible for it, then why hasn't Vegas closed this investigation? I mean, Las Vegas PD would like nothing more than to have this monkey off their back, because every year at September time comes the death anniversary and all that, and then the phone call starts to the police department, what's going on with this case, why aren't you investigating it, public outcries out there about it. And so you get this whole notion of Vegas would love to be done with this. I'm sure they'd love to be done with this case.
Yeah.
So the easy
doesn't
thing
behoove
to do,
them to carry it on.
No. And the last thing the easiest thing for them to do, the course of least resistance, would be just to clear it other. Here's what we think, the dead guy did it, sign off on it, put it away. It goes into the archives, never to be seen again. And that'd be easy. Yet they haven't done that. And you have to ask yourself why. It's important.
Yeah. Now, obviously, even Tupac's mother is now passed.
Right.
You know, what was the last feelings or words from her, you know, before she passed? You know, was there an inclination on, you know, her feelings? Obviously, she would love this solved, I'm sure,
I'm gonna
but
sneeze here in a minute.
no problem. Feel free.
Okay.
But what was her feelings upon her death that you know of?
Well, it's interesting. She had really, in the last few years of her life, she'd kind of avoided the whole subject altogether. And that's healthy. She was moving on and doing things. It doesn't do any good to keep going back over things. And she kind of said that from the very beginning. Christopher Wallace's mom, Biggie Smalls' mom, was a completely different animal in the sense that she's very much involved. She's very much engaged. She still wants to know what's going on, what happened with her son, and why nobody's doing anything about it. So they've got two completely different mindsets going on there with the two women. With Afeni was worried more about Pac's legacy in terms of the estate, trying to get matters handled with E1 or with Death Row Records and get the masters back that they kept avoiding giving her the masters. I even heard an interview, wasn't even a week ago, with some cat who said that he still had all the unreleased masters of Tupac on encrypted hard drives, and the estate does not have them, and then he has to make some deal with the estate to get them. So it's a very, very weird video, but nevertheless, it just kind of emphasizes the point that Afeni really made it her mission in life to protect Tupac's legacy, try to collect that music, get it in such a way that she could do that. That was really
Focus more on the music than the murder.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, move on. Let's learn from it. Let's move forward. Let's honor Pac's legacy in a
it's like Abraham Lincoln. Let's not keep talking about how he was shot. Let's talk about what a great man he was.
Exactly, and what he did for society. So I think that was kind of her prevailing attitude. Now, I had met Afeni more than once. We had released the first Tupac Assassination movie in 2007. We were getting ready to do the second one, Assassination 2. And when we did the second movie, we reached out because Frank had always had a good relationship with Afeni and the estate. And we reached out to them and we said, you know, you have in Atlanta, Stone Mountain, Georgia, you have the Tupac Shakur Foundation, Memorial Gardens, the museum, all of that. We'd like to shoot there. We're going to be in Atlanta for a film festival anyway. We got the red carpet selection. I think it was the Atlanta Film Festival for Assassination. Big thing on the film festival circuit. And we're going to be in Atlanta, so we said, hey, listen, why don't we call and see if we can shoot some footage out there at the foundation? And they were very gracious. Sure, come on out. You can shoot there. Afeni wasn't there that time. Glow was there, who was her sister, Afeni's sister, Tupac's aunt, who ran the foundation pretty much for Afeni. Afeni lived in North Carolina, I think it was, and the foundation was there in Georgia. But we were welcomed with open arms. We shot all over the foundation, and I'm glad because that location has long since been closed. So they're trying to build a museum or something now at this point, a different location. And that was a beautiful location. It was just, they closed it down. So it's not there anymore. But I'm glad that we did capture that and document. What's what documentarians do, right? They document things.
Right.
We documented that point in time. Nice thing about it was that the estate and the members of the estate, Gloria Cox and all them, came to the screening of Tupac Assassination, the first one. We were in the middle of shooting the second one, and meanwhile we had a screening of the first one there. The family came out and sat for the screening of Assassination. And to me that said everything that I needed to know about where they believed their politics were, where our politics were with the theories that we had surrounding the death, and who was responsible for it and why. And they came out and they supported us, and I was very thankful for their support, and I remain so to this day. But that was it. The last time I talked to Afeni was at the Shakur birthday celebration. They, for a while at the foundation, and of course it stopped when they closed, they were having a Tupac birthday celebration where they'd have everybody from Tupac's life there, the Outlaws of Reform, other people were involved, and they had kind of a big fair. It was like a Lollapalooza for Tupac. That was their birthday celebration.
Yeah.
And they had it for a few years and then they stopped doing it. But each year I'd go down there, I'd take a couple of boxes of DVDs down there and put them out on the table to be sold, and all the money from the DVDs went to the foundation. So it was a way to sell, to sell some DVDs for the foundation to get them their money coming in. And I ran into Afeni there, and I'll tell you, the first time I met her was at the Tupac birthday celebration the year before, when I got introduced to Glow, or introduced by Glow to Afeni. Afeni threw her hands around me and gave me a big hug, started crying, and she said thank you. And that was all I needed. At that point, I think that was all I needed to know that Tupac's mom cared about the work that we were doing. Right or wrong, we cared to be doing something about it. And that's the point. You see a lot of these people, the Greg Kadings of the world, you see a lot of these people that are running around right now talking about, oh, the investigation's closed, oh, it's closed. Well, that's convenient to say because then you don't have to do anything. It requires nothing from you other than to comment on it or opine about it. Those who don't believe that it's closed, you do the work and you're constantly trying to find out and get to the bottom of what's going on. That, to me, is what made a difference with Afeni. I think that's, that we were trying. We were constantly going out there and trying to figure out what happened.
Uncover facts, talk to real people
cops
that are involved.
Yeah, we're not cops, but we're going out there at least beating the bushes trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah, so rather than throw some rumor and some shocking clickbait out there,
right,
you're trying to investigate truth.
Yeah, exactly. And go where it goes, and wasn't long before we had a pretty sound construct in terms of what we believed happened and why, and it's gone through a few changes over the years, but not it's never gone back on itself. In other words, we didn't think A and then A was impossible, so we completely changed it to B. Essentially, what we did originally was we said, okay, listen, these are the people that we think are involved, and more along the lines of, these are the people that had means, motive, and opportunity to do something. Does it mean they did something? No. But if they did, here's why they might have. Here's their means, motive, and opportunity. And that's how we evaluated it throughout the assassination movies. We said, you be the judge. We're going to put it out there. We're not going to directly say so-and-so did it. It wasn't Professor Plum with the candlestick in the library. We say, well, there was a library and there was a candlestick and Professor Plum was around. Could he have done it? Maybe. But you be the judge. We'll give you the facts. We'll put that stuff together. And
right.
That was how we did it.
Now, through the development of these various documentaries, how has Frank changed, or how has he withstood the scrutiny of these pieces, or what's his current feeling and status?
Well, Frank passed away in 2013.
Okay.
And at the time, he was very much, he was like a season that didn't change. His story was his story. We got, Frank and I, towards the end, had a bit of a split. It wasn't an earth-shattering thing. It wasn't everything that people make it out to be. We'd done a lot of business together. We'd done the movies together, and we stayed and remained good friends. The challenge that we had is when I did a book called Tupac 187, which was a book that I had done with a former LAPD detective, Russell Poole, and we had done that story. Russell and I talked about it a lot. And Russell still believed that the case could be taken to a grand jury, the case could be taken to to the police, to somebody that could actually do something about the case, that it was solvable, that there were actually people responsible that hadn't been prosecuted that could be. And in our discussions about that and doing the book 187, which laid out what the theories were around that and why, much more detail than you go into in a DVD. You can only go so far with the audiovisual media. You do a book, you can go a lot deeper dive into details and facts and all that. But as we got to talking, one of the things that Russell and I agreed on was that Frank was going to be very important because he was a witness. He was there as the bodyguard the night that Tupac Shakur was shot. He had valuable information, and it's very tough to put a witness's name on a byline for a book. He had already produced a couple of, Before I Wake was the movie he had produced, and then that led to the first two Assassination movies that he was on with me as a co-producer. And so when you have a witness who's also a co-producer and is making money off of the story, does that devalue him as a witness? Is this something that a defense attorney could say, "Oh, don't you stand to make money if you say it this way, and haven't you already said it in these movies, and how much money did you make off them?" And it kind of really starts to taint your witness. And Russ and I thought, well, there's something we want to do. We don't want to taint Frank anymore because we think he's a great witness, he's a credible witness, but that's what he is, he's a witness. So in this case, he's not going to be a producer or an author. We're going to develop his story and tell his story, but it's not going to be his work. That way we're clean. If we take this to the prosecutor, we're clean in this.
Well, it's not from him, it's about him.
Right, exactly. And that was some confusion from before, and I think there are people that kind of dinged his credibility based on that. So, especially when you have the defense, the people that he's coming out and saying things about, accusing him of just being a flat-out liar and a profiteer. So Russ and I said, okay, fine, we're just not going to have him. I had to break that news to my friend of almost 20 years, that I can't include you. I don't know that he ever fully understood that. Sometimes you can get in your own way, and I'm not saying that Frank got in his own way, but Frank, like a lot of people, you get an emotional reaction to something. You feel like you're being left out. You feel like somebody's keeping you out of something. I think that weighed on him, and we certainly talked about it. We had words about it, and I think from that point forward, there was a little bit of a distance that hadn't been there before. But that also comes because once I'm working on a book with this guy over here, I'm not talking about the work I'm doing with Russell because Frank's a witness, and I don't want to taint him anymore by giving him inside factoids and tipping him off. Because if somebody asks him a question, he answers a question. Well, do you know that for a fact? No, I heard it from R.J. Bond. Now we got a problem. So that was necessary, and I think like a marriage, best of friends, the minute that you start having secrets from each other, the minute that you start segregating the information that you know, especially in a relationship that's built on trust and transparency, you start to have problems. There's a wedge that gets driven in the middle there. And I think ultimately that's kind of what drove the wedge between Frank and I in the end. And but I was there for his funeral. I was there, the day he died. And but he went to his grave believing 100% what he believed, and was pretty vicious about coming after people that didn't agree with him on it. So he's a strong character. Yeah.
Well, tell us about the latest
Battle for
documentary.
Compton. This is
And
Battle for Compton.
and I know there's some new revelations, or I'm reading in the press release some news. Obviously, there's talk of a new Tupac album coming out, and obviously new.
Yeah, I've heard that there's a
new
couple
facts.
of Tupac albums coming
out. People are still intrigued with this, and forever will be. It's just like the JFK assassination. You know.
Yep.
Until it's solved, it's only speculation that you hear. So, in the uncovering of facts, talking to real witnesses, please tell us about the latest, the need for that, what that gives the viewer, and what's the latest in the world of Tupac Shakur.
Sure. Well, Battle for Compton was it followed 187. Battle for Compton was what I consider to be kind of the final word on the matter, as far as the 10 years worth of investigation that I had done. Others, Mike Carlin, Russ Poole, other people that were involved, Frank Alexander, all of this information that we had amassed, and we kind of just said, we're going to throw everything out there. And the movie's almost 2.5 hours long. It's a huge, long movie, for a documentary especially.
Yeah.
And in it, we really lay out from end to end the entire story of the reason that Tupac and Biggie, that we believe anyway, the reason that Tupac and Biggie were killed. It was part of a much bigger situation, and I don't buy into these grandiose conspiracy theories. That's not what this is about. This is about a drug pipeline. This was about cartels. This was about drug money. This is about money laundering and drug trafficking, and people in an industry that dealt with that, like Tupac and Biggie, that just flew too close to the behind the scenes of what was going on. And the movie surmises that Tupac was actually killed in an attempted takeover of Death Row Records. That there were some insiders there that thought that Suge Knight was becoming too much of a liability to the record album. He was making too much noise. He was just too visible. And as a result, he was a target in Las Vegas. Tupac was with him, and Tupac was a collateral damage. Ironically, Tupac died, Suge did not. And that, to me, sent the entire rest of the narrative into motion, because if you have people that are planning to get rid of somebody, planning to assassinate somebody, to off them, and Tupac was killed and Suge was killed, no problem, everything moves forward. But when one of your victims lives through it, and Suge Knight lived, one of many attempts on his life that he lived through. When Suge lived, well, that became a problem for the people that didn't expect for him to live. It didn't work out like they thought to. It was kind of a botched job. And so now you've got this problem because Suge Knight, one of the most powerful men in the music industry at that time, is asking who's shooting at me and why. And so you have to come up with a reason for that. So the East Coast, West Coast, the gangs, things that are certainly true and happening at that time became the go-to reason. Oh, it had to do with East Coast, West Coast, or oh, it had to go to the gangs. Because Suge Knight needed to understand who was shooting him and why. And because obviously he's going to go out and try to get retribution about that. So the movie surmises that there was an alleged, and I'll say alleged, there was an alleged coup at Death Row Records that failed. And when Suge Knight wanted to know what was happening, there was a cover story that had to come up. And the death of Christopher Wallace was in furtherance of the cover-up story. And we see that over and over and over again when we say in furtherance of the cover-up story, that there were many other instances and things that happened along the way to try to cover that up. That became, the LAPD got involved with it, when it became about LAPD cops working for Death Row Records, when it became Compton Police being shut down as a police department. They were completely closed as a police department for corruption. They were selling drugs out of their evidence locker. All these things were furtherance of the original coup that went bad. And it was all damage control, and it remains that way 20 years later. It still remains damage control. Unsolved, the television show Unsolved, the couple of the 80s special that was out about Tupac and Biggie. Fox special, not so much, but a little bit. it really still furthers a narrative that there are certain people that want out there that say the dead guy did it. And everybody goes home asleep, comfortable with that fact. We don't believe that, and Battle for Compton doesn't suppose that at all. Battle for Compton supposes that the guy that everybody wants to believe for it was actually kind of a patsy of the whole thing, okay? And so the Lee Harvey Oswald, if you will, of the JFK, world, and so we put that information out there as well. The new information that's come out since actually has to do with the lead FBI detective. His name is Phil Carson, and the FBI was involved with investigating both the Wallace and the Shakur killings. The way the FBI is organized is that they have like 5 or 6 main field offices all over the United States. They have agents going everywhere, but their main offices are in the big cities: Chicago, Miami, New York, Los Angeles. I think there's one up in Portland or Seattle, maybe. I'm just thinking Seattle. And they have these offices. And FBI offices are staffed with investigators that go off and run these big investigations. The problem with big investigations is that the FBI isn't like the Kremlin KGB, where there was 50,000 people on the FBI payroll. The FBI is an agency of the federal government that is not staffed to independently investigate everything on their own. There's an inherent need for FBI to, goes back to the Old West days. Remember how they used to deputize people? Here's your star. Old West sheriff come into town. He needed 3 guys because he didn't have enough guys, and he'd put the star on them and say, "You've been deputized." The FBI has an inherent need for other law enforcement agencies to do a lot of the legwork, to do a lot of the wheels in motion, to do interviews, pick up the phone, call people, because the FBI is just not staffed for it.
Yeah.
And so what you've got is the FBI coming out here to Los Angeles, and the FBI comes up, and Phil Carson, who was the lead investigator for that, comes up with a case that he's ready to file charges on. He's ready to go. He's got everything all plugged in, everything where it needs to go. He knows who did it and why. And then his handlers and the boss at the FBI tell him, "That's it, you're done. No more." And why? Well, because we have stuff to work with the LAPD. If you look at what's just happened with ICE and how the state of California has kind of declared war on the federal government. And they say, well, we're not going to help ICE anymore, Customs and Immigration. We're not going to help them. In fact, you've got politicians calling these subjects of the ICE investigations and giving them a heads up ahead of time that ICE is coming out to their door. Okay? So the job that ICE is trying to do is completely frustrated in the state of California. Well, thinking to the FBI, and if you look at it that way, in their way of thinking, if the FBI makes waves with the LAPD, then what help is the FBI going to get on the next big case they're trying to work? The LAPD is not going to refuse to help them. Suddenly they've lost a major resource, and they can't work their cases. They can't do that. So I really think that it was a conscious decision that was made, and Phil Carson was told, "You're not investigating anymore." Now, let's jump forward 20 years later. He's retiring. In fact, he retired last year. While the FBI controls you, they control your job, they pay your paycheck, and you do what they tell you to do, including stay quiet. But when you retire, that's different. And what we found was that Phil Carson, coming out of retirement, well, he's just going for it, and he's putting the information out there. And what we found is that most of the information that he's bringing out from the FBI's investigation of the killings corroborates many of the points that we've got in the assassination movies in Battle for Compton, the last one that we did. So it makes it fulfilling for us to know that Phil Carson was angry about the fact that for 20 years they wouldn't let him put anything out about it, and now he wants to clear the air of it all. So we're really looking forward to his documents. We're looking forward to his interviews. It'll be fun to see, but again, it completely corroborates a lot of the salient points that we make in the assassination movies.
So as a former agent and now a citizen, there's no confidentiality. He can fully discuss what he knows
Right.
as a citizen.
Yep. Not only that, but they get to take their case notes home with them.
Mhm.
And recently, because of Greg Kading, who did the Unsolved shows, he was an LAPD cop that worked on one of the Wallace task forces. He not only took his notes home, he took all the filing documents, almost the entire file of the Wallace case, and including tape recordings of interviews with people in that. Now, to me, I still don't understand the last part. They're allowing you to take your notes home with you, and you take your personal notes home because they're yours, they're your notes. But to take information and tape recordings made of interviews of witnesses, that to me seems like evidence that belongs to the police department. It doesn't sound like something that, as a former cop, I would be able to take home with me, tape recorded conversations, etc. So I've always had a problem with that. I've always struggled with that. But that set a precedence that if you're in law enforcement, you can take your stuff with you. If you need to get that, go ahead.
That's good.
You can take your stuff with you. So, and Phil Carson knew it, and I'm sure he's a smart dude. He's confiscated thousands of pages of FBI files from, and they're not redacted because he got them straight from the horse's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
He's got that. If he's got tape recorded phone conversations with people, they're in trouble. If he's got them, because they're going to come out. And he's got a 20-year grudge because they wouldn't let him do anything about it for 20 years. So this guy wants to clean his claws of it. He wants to put it all out there. And that's great. Again, like I said, I don't know Phil Carson, the FBI guy. I've never met him. I don't know his guy, Don Sikorsky, the guy that introduced him and put some of that stuff out there from him, on behalf of him. But that's good. Because, you know, at one point the trolls were coming out and saying that I was coaching witnesses and I was telling people what to say, and it's not true. In the documentaries, it's not true. But they came out with that allegation. So it's nice to see somebody else who's confirming and documenting all of this.